Happy Monday to you. It is December 2nd. I am Paige Margaret, and this is your Monday Minute. Let yourself have a breath or two as we lean in together, because I get to share with you today about the mechanics of bravery, why it matters, and how bravery works. Now, check this out. A friend of mine recently shared with me that she was brought up to believe that relationships would complete her. So many of us can relate to this, right? Whether it's a best friend or a romantic partner, that relationships will complete us. This is that famous Jerry Maguire line with Renee Zellweger, right? Sooner or later, that fantasy busts, and sometimes it busts big, and we can adopt another fantasy that's a touch more realistic, but a fantasy nonetheless. And that fantasy is that people who are truly committed will work on their problems over time to the resolution of shared healing and shared reality with the other. That's also a fantasy that busts, and we come to a choice point of deciding to either tolerate very frustrating relationships or to leave the relationship in search of the, quote, better fit. Albeit, this is a very female orientation to relationships, but I find that men go through a orientation that is similar and that it's filled with just as much fantasy and certainly just as much frustration. They are brought up to believe that relationships will either be automatic and they just sort of occur beautifully on their own, or commonly that relationships are a trap at worst and a loss of freedom at best. At some point, they will often work through these limiting beliefs and come to another fantasy, a touch more realistic, and that is that relationships, whether with a best friend or a romantic partner, can be equitable 50-50 relationships in which there is even give and take. This fantasy also busts because who decides what is equitable and who's giving the taking and who's doing the giving? They find themselves at their own choice point of tolerating relationships that are challenging or searching for, quote, that right fit. For me, these progressions and these relational choice points are wholly unacceptable, and they do not reflect the divinity that I believe in. Now, as a therapist, check this out. I was taught, and it is the culture, that problems are not really transcendable or solvable, but rather we cope individually with however we experience them personally, and then we work to manage them in shared ways through coping and communication and various techniques, with the hope that the conflicts will be less in intensity and less in frequency over time. In fact, John Gottman bears this out in his 30-year research on romantic couples, that 69% of conflicts will never be resolved. So you're telling me that in my relationship with my beloved, we are going to have 69% of our conflicts recur and never be solved or healed? This is also wholly unacceptable to me and certainly doesn't reflect the God that I believe in. If you were at Love Actually last time, you know I spoke about the spiritual purpose of relationships as vehicles for transformation and awakening, and that relationships absolutely can be reflective of divinity and capital L love, and not reflective of our egos, of our cultural trends, and certainly not statistics. If we're really going to do this, if we're really going to live in the spiritual purpose and possibility of relationships, we are going to need a mechanics of bravery. It's going to be indispensable, because what we're talking about is entering a relational wilderness where our relationships are alive, unpredictable, with a lot of that wilderness being raw and cold. But I'll tell you what, just as much being beautiful and spontaneous and unparalleled. How do we navigate this? How do we source and root with feelings that will be big and things that will be out of our control, such as another's behavior as well as outcomes? And more importantly, how do we be vessels for spirit and miracles and our souls in those relationships, and not vessels of our ego or our fears or our histories? A mechanics of bravery. You see what I'm talking about? I want to invite you to come out Thursday to hear about how bravery works from Brene Brown and John Wellwood and thought leaders in the field of really truly living relationships as vehicles for our awakening. I hope to see you December 5th, Thursday at 6:45 for Love Actually, and we're really going to dig into this. I'll see you there.